Hello and welcome to class today. I'm Amanda Bramble and we're here at Ampersand Sustainable Learning Center. Our class today is called The Rain Provides Living Systems for Rainwater Reliance. So we're going to talk about what it's like to live off of rain catchment as your only water source, which is what we do here. And through this process, I will show you all of the systems that we've developed here at Ampersand to allow conscious use, to really train conscious use of water and all resources, so that we can live off of what the rain provides for us here. We're in the high desert, so we're at 5,800 feet elevation, and we just get 8 inches, say 8 to 9 inches a year in a good year of rain. So that's not much, and we're able to live off this rain catchment, collecting from the roofs, collecting from what flows off of the land into the garden spaces, and storing that and using that throughout the year. So we're going to talk about the systems that allow us to do this here. Let me tell you a little bit about Ampersand first. So we have a demonstration site here for permaculture, which involves many different things. So solar work, natural building, land restoration, the water systems, the organic gardening in the high desert, and so the passive solar design also is a very important part of that. So we do all of these things here, and you can go to our website, www.ampersandproject.org, to learn more about the different things. Today we're going to focus on rainwater catchment. And why are we going to do that? Why is that important? Well, not everyone needs to live completely off of rain catchment to benefit from the systems that we have developed and the sort of consciousness that we have around water. We've lived here for 14 years now, so we've been doing this and developing these systems. I designed all of the water systems on site, so I'm pleased to show you through, walk you through that today. But why do we really need to be learning about water systems and rainwater collection? Well, there's a few reasons. Number one, we have a changing climate. In a lot of places, we're looking at drying lands, larger expanses of time when you don't get rainfall. We're looking at warming lands, warming climate. Another reason is that in a lot of places our aquifers are lowering. And so the aquifer is, when you use a well, you're tapping into groundwater. And you're basically tapping into water that is underground that that will flow into your well, and then you can use it for watering your plants and for living. But in many places, people are having to drill wells deeper and deeper. And that means you're not using water at a sustainable rate, because your aquifer should recharge and, in your rainy season, to refill up to the level where you can get the water. That that you're using water at a sustainable rate when your aquifer recharges and you don't have to dig a deeper well. Well, wells are going dry, people are digging deeper wells. That means you're tapping into water that is not rechargeable. So that's not a sustainable use of resources. And when we look at designing systems for long-term use, we're talking about our children and our grandchildren, future generations. If we want wherever we are to be habitable for future generations, we need to not be drawing on their resources and taking away from what our future generations would be using, of course. So we have the aquifers lowering. We also have this legacy of in this country, for sure, we've had, colonization, and we have people that are designing the infrastructure for our cities and for our general living environments that are from, these design ideas are from a different location. So out here in the West, often they came from the East, right? And then from the East, they came from Europe. Often the dominant culture comes from these different lands that have different requirements, but the aesthetic and the design systems are put in, like lawns, for example. There's these certain aesthetics that our culture is used to and that have a sort of status involved that are not appropriate for our place. So what the earth needs of us is to re-indigenize ourselves, to be of a place, to design appropriately for our location. So we're using the resources that are given to us freely in a regenerative way and using them respectfully and thinking of our future generations, thinking of the health of the land, rather than just imposing our ideas upon the land and extracting resources in order to fulfill this vision. So that's something that needs to change. And so realizing how you can live off of rainwater, how you can collect and use rainwater, is one part of that change. And all of this kind of goes in hand with the fossil fuel dependence that we have had as a culture for a long time, but not that long, right? So most of humanity, we didn't rely on fossil fuels, but it's creating this problem, climate change, which is why we need to start adapting. And then in order to be respectful humans, creatures on this earth, we need to stop being part of the problem. So we need to reclaim what is a true healthy relationship with the earth, as direct as possible, where you're getting feedback from the earth to show you how your relationship is going. So, we're going towards growing more of our food locally, using local building materials, natural building, using natural materials rather than mass-produced, industrial materials, to extract ourselves from that fossil fuel-based infrastructure that's not necessary for our survival or our happiness, but that is kind of how we're trained in this culture that I have grown up within. So, these are some reasons that are important to me in terms of why people need to learn about water systems and be more respectful in our relationship with water. And on a personal note of why do I live off of rain catchment and what do I get out of it? It's not just like, I'm trying to solve all these problems. It's, when we got this property, which is dry, it's a high desert, we don't have a well, we couldn't afford to drill a well. Would I have preferred to get property that has a running stream through it? I must admit, yes, I would have much preferred to have some running water on my land. But this is what I could afford, and we're making the best of it and making a joyful, sustainable, as sustainable as possible life from it. So I'm not the only one in this situation. Many people are just trying to live as sustainable as they can in the location that they have because they didn't show up in this world. They didn't show up on the land with tons of money, tons of resources. You make your life what you can of what you have. And everything that we've created here at Ampersand is do-it-yourself type of construction, and the water systems, we're using salvage materials a lot, which does take things out of the waste stream, which is another important part of, reconfiguring our relationship with the earth. We don't want to be throwing things away into a landfill or into the ocean. That just doesn't make sense. But if you can take things that would get thrown away and use them to make a good life for yourself, then that makes a lot of sense. So it also is more economical to design around the things that you can gather. So that's what we've done at Ampersand. We didn't start with a lot of money. We started with ideas, and with what we could gather and put together water systems as we could. And part of it is budgeting your water, which we'll get into. So it's like you design a flexible system that you can adapt and you can grow from, and then you realize what your water budget is, and then you can grow over years from that. So back to why I'm happy to be living off rainwater. You know, as I said, it's not that I said, hey, I want to live completely off rainwater. I want that challenge. However, over the years that we've done this, it's really developed my relationship with water and with my land and with the weather. And so when it rains, it's watering my land, and I can look out and see if we've had a rainy season. I can see the grasses growing on the hillside and things turn green. And then I also know when I look out and things are green on the landscape, my tanks are full as well. So there's this real sense of abundance and joy that comes from receiving the rain and then honoring the rain, the waters, as being precious and using them respectfully. There's a real sense of deepening relationship with place and a real sense of joy that comes from this relationship that it's hard to really explain any deeper than that. But in this world where so many of us are looking for a happier life, and the media is showing us that we need to consume more, actually there's this direction towards connection with the earth and connection with the land and connection with place that is deeply fulfilling for us as humans and goes back a long way. So that is part of my story and part of my excitement about showing you these systems that we've developed. So also, it's worth mentioning, we're looking at climate change, adapting to climate change, not contributing to climate change through these systems, through developing these really locally based regenerative systems. And we are looking at redesigning our lives that in a way that's respectful of, not just respectful, but like practically in relationship with our environment. So getting away from fossil fuel dependency and really not contributing towards the extractive industries, like, you know, water being taken out of the ground that is not replenishable. So I'm glad to have you here with us for this class today, and I'll be touring you through the site and showing you the systems that I've developed to allow us to live off rainwater. And I hope, you know, that you benefit from seeing how we do it. Even if you're not going to live completely off rainwater like we are, there are things to be learned that hopefully will contribute towards your sustainability in your life. Thank you. Well, here we are at our rain collection area, and we're here at the top of our site of the built environment, which is handy because gravity is what we work with as much as possible rather than having to use pumps. So we gravity feed everything that we can to the lower parts of our site to get the rain to come out of our faucets. This is where it all comes from. Well, this is actually where it all comes from on a good rainy day. But so the water, this is our house, me and my husband's house. So it's our main, biggest collection site. And this roof, when it rains, it drains into this gutter. And these gutters we custom made because the roof doesn't happen to be square. It's kind of an odd shape, which I do recommend building square roofs. But we custom made this out of some sewer drain pipe, new, not salvaged, of course. And it comes down into here and goes through this pipe to the cistern. Now, we realized at some point that we needed more water. We needed more collection area. So we added the shop. You can see the gutter It drains here, and then you can follow the drain pipe all the way back onto the main collection of the house. Now it comes out this PVC pipe that I cut holes in. I cut slits in it so it doesn't all just come out in one place on the roof, and because that would be too much water at once, and it may overshoot the gutters down here. So it's at many places so that it gently comes onto the roof. We also have the addition to our house is built afterwards. That's kind of like a little mud room and porch space, and the drainage from that roof also goes onto this roof. And then we also have, we extended the gutters here because we notice sometimes the monsoons are really, the rain can really come down fast sometimes, and we saw the water overshooting the gutters. So we added these gutter extensions with salvage materials, pond liner, this flashing, and we call them climate change ready gutters extensions. So, and at some points we have put rocks on top of this roof just to slow down the water to get it to more gently flow into here so it doesn't overshoot. But if it does overshoot, which can happen, you know, we don't have 100% efficiency gutters, and also we have cold winters and we'll get ice and icicles and snow, you know, coming off sometimes. So we also have a French drain under here that catches whatever doesn't make it into the gutters. And so it's a lined French drain, and we use pond liner and then rocks on top, and it drains down here. Now you'll see our solar panels as well. The solar panels, this is a good amount of catchment area too. We can catch off of any impermeable surface, and honestly, and permeable surfaces. But so the rain will come down off of this and drain here or over here and come down into this gutter as well. So this lined French drain comes down into this garden bed. And the way that we create our gardens for the most part here is we dig them really deep. We take that subsoil and make a pathway and water harvesting earthwork on the lower side. So it catches this water. We refill that ditch with good soil and using different manures and composts and stuff. And then plant our things in there. It's a sunken garden and it has mulch on it to keep the moisture in. And so this, whenever we get a good rain, this will flood and feed whatever we have here. At different times we've had different things. We've had a mushroom bed and we've grown oyster mushrooms in here, which was really nice. Right now we have this jujube tree getting established, and we have Egyptian walking onions. It's a dry year, so we plan to plant the things according to our water budget. This is our main tank that collects the rainwater. It's 2,500 gallons of capacity up to here, and it has this nice measurement area where you can see how many gallons. So this says 2,200, and then here we are down at 1,000. It's a little bit buried in the ground, and that helps with when it is winter here and we don't want our water to freeze. Ideally, there's a big mass of water in this tank and it won't freeze anyway because the sun hits it and it'll warm up regularly. But it's nice to be a little bit buried so that the place where the water comes out and the spigots and the valves is insulated, because we're at 5,800 feet elevation. So it's the high desert, and we get snow, we get regularly freezing, below freezing temperatures here. So we have to plan for both extremes. So it's the water budgeting and measuring how much water we have is very important to us. And this is my front door. So I can come peek right outside my front door and see how many gallons of water I have. So just like you wouldn't spend money without knowing generally how much is in your bank account, you can't use water in this situation, living completely off rainwater, without knowing generally how much water you have. So So here's how we tell. Now, this is a gauge. See this little red dangly thing? So this dangles right at the level of where our water is in the tank. And so this is a good way to track. Now we're getting down towards the bottom. Now we have 2 tanks. So this is one, our second one is 2,000 gallon capacity. So that's 4,500 gallons of capacity of water for our main storage. And so it can be open, they're connected underneath the ground, and there's a valve we can access. So right now they're open to each other. They may also, sometimes we keep them closed. So that tank will be completely full, and then this one is the one we're drawing from. Often that's the case. Right now they're open to each other, and because the water's been going down, getting low, something you should know is that the desert here, we'll get ideally 8 inches of rain in a year. So that's not much. We've been able to live this way with only rain catchment as our water source for ever since we got that second tank and we got the shop roof put on. So, and that's been about 8 years. We haven't had any water shipped in, which a lot of people in these off-grid situations, they get a water truck, hire a water truck to come in and fill their tank. But it's really nice living off rainwater, especially because the well water in this area is not very good. The rainwater is tasty, deluxe. We keep it nice and clean. I'll show you how. But for now, I'm showing you how to measure the water. Say the water is here at 1,800 gallons. So when we have especially new people here and we're teaching them how we live off rainwater, we'll take a sticker and we'll write the date on it and we'll put it right here and say, okay, this is the date, this is where it was. Now, if we don't get any rain, that in a week, the water will go down, say that much, maybe, and then we'll take another sticker, and we will put it on there. So then we have those dates on the stickers, and then we can divide by the number of days, and then we can divide by the number of people here, and then that will show us, it'll give us the number of gallons we've been using per person per day. And usually, ideally, it's somewhere between 3 and 5 for personal use. So when we're watering the gardens, often we're accessing other tanks, and when those tanks go empty and we need to access this tank, then we take that into consideration. But we do measure, we do know exactly how much water we're watering, really everything, because we need to. Here is where the rain comes into the tank. You may notice it's a very primitive situation, basically a series of screens, and we actually used colanders here. So we're in a situation where we don't have trees overhanging our roof, so we don't have a whole lot of organic matter that we have to filter out. If you did, you would need a first flush or some other kind of system to gather that the first rain that comes off and all of the organic matter. But for us, we're dealing with a little bit of juniper berries, a little bit of bird poop, and dust is basically what comes out here. So it comes into here, and here's an easy way to clean out whatever comes in. We just take this filter out and bang it here, and that's how we get the stuff out. There's another couple layers of filters here. Now, to keep the water clean, you may think that seems pretty primitive, but one really important thing is that the tanks don't let light in. So they're opaque. And then we also paint them so that you don't have UV breakdown. And the sun here in the high desert is very strong, and you want to preserve your plastic so that it doesn't get brittle and break, of course, and also you don't want it breaking down and off-gassing into your water. So we keep them painted, and we don't let light in. So the light is what creates algae, and if you have a lot of light coming in, then you will end up with maybe even mats of algae growing on the top of your water. Now, actual algae is it's not detrimental. It actually cleans the water, and it'll oxygenate the water. So it's a living creature, it's fine. It's just that you don't want to have things that will get caught up in pumps and clog your lines and things like that. So that's an important thing, to keep your tank opaque and not let light in. Of course, you don't want rodents getting in either, so just sealing it all up so you don't have critters going in there and dying. You don't want mosquitoes in there either, so screening. So that's basically it. And oxygenation every once in a while is good, so you can put a pump in there. You can have the hose coming out and pump it back in to get oxygen in. But we've been living this way for 14 years off of rain catchment we never have to go in and clean the tank. It's cool here. There's no problems. We have a place to filter the water before we drink it, but this is how we use it for the shower, for washing dishes, and irrigating. This is our rain gauge. So when it rains, this will fill up and show us how much it's rained. And right now, we recently got a 1/2 inch, and so you can see that right in there. And this is one part of our system so that we can measure what's going on and measure how much rain we get over whatever period of time. This has been a really dry year, really dry winter, and we haven't gotten more than 2 inches yet. And it is May. It's late May, and so even the beginning of December, we haven't gotten more than 2 inches. So we're on the low side. But if you for every inch of rain that you collect, say you have a collection area, so a roof that is 1,000 square feet. For each inch of rain, you'll get 600 or over 600 gallons. So that's just one kind of rule of thumb that you can expect. And usually for us, we will, during monsoon season, our tanks, both of them, so all 4,500 gallons, will fill up completely, and there's an overflow, and it's very important that you have the overflow of your tank going to a place where it's beneficial. And then we will use that water through the winter and then into the spring, and ideally it lasts us until the next monsoon season. And that's how it's been going for many years, and we have high hopes about this year too. This is a water harvesting earthwork bed where we're growing perennial vegetables. All of these things are very important for permaculture design and practices here in our area. The water harvesting earthworks, of course, you can see by this big pile of earth. It's been added here to the berm and the pathway to create a place where water will collect in really good soil. And we're growing sunchokes here, or Jerusalem artichokes. And so these are a very resilient vegetable that we can grow here in the high desert. Basically, these sunchokes grow up here. They grow about this tall, and they make sunflowers. And it's in the sunflower family, but it's the root that you eat. So they make these tubers, and then so they die back in the fall. And then all winter, I'm coming here and digging up the tubers and harvesting them for food. So that's a nice winter crop. But this bed, so when it rains, you have water flowing off of the land that catches in this earthwork. Also, there's a downspout from part of a roof over here that gets directed right to this bed. There's also a French drain, like in the other place behind our house, that directs storm water into the bed. And there's a Greywater feed. So if we have enough water to take a bath, then we would drain the bath water out here for this. Also, there's an irrigation system and a good tracking technique for that. Most of our garden areas have several sources of water. There's Greywater, there's direct rainwater, and then there's different tanks that are specifically for irrigation that we can pull the water from and use watering cans. And then also we have drip systems. So we would never, like many places, just have a drip system that goes on automatically and just automatically waters. We use our intelligence and context as a really important part of our management of water here. And so it depends on the weather, it depends on the plants and the stage of maturity of the plants of how much water they need. And so I'm always tracking how much water and how often I'm giving it to them. And so this is one way. It's kind of the last resort when our other tanks have filled up and I'm not able to water with the watering can, or if we haven't had rains that directly water, or if the Greywater hasn't been used enough. Then, or if I'm really short on time and I just need to water things and I need to be doing something else, I have this irrigation system. So I'll hook up my hose, so this water comes from this tank, but you'll notice it's higher than this tank, so it needs a pump. The water from this tank goes underground into my house, goes to a pressure tank with a pump, and comes out this hose. So I can hook it up with this little quick hookup here to the end of an irrigation system of any of these garden spots. And then I hook it up, and then I can turn on the timer and I can track the number of gallons that I'm giving each garden. I happen to know that the terrace garden right now needs about 14 gallons each watering. I'm giving it water about every 2.5 or 3 days. This is the terrace garden. So this is our main annual growing garden bed here. And there are a few different really important aspects that allow us to have this lush garden in the desert environment while living off rainwater catchment completely. One is that we have shade. So you see how I've opened the shade protection, and it's removable shade. So certain times of year, certain times of day you want shade, and there's also wind protection. So the shade cloth on the sides, as well as being tucked into the hill, can help with protecting from the drying winds, especially in the spring when you're planting little transplants. It's really important for us to have wind protection. So soil is the next one, and we have to have really good soil here, and we make it with our composting. We have worm composting as well as hot composting, and we add animal manures and composted manures. Now, deep watering is really important for a desert garden because you're encouraging the roots to grow deep so that when it gets dry and hot out, the roots aren't really vulnerable to that drying. They're deep in the soil. So one way that we encourage that is by having these oyas. So these are unglazed clay pots that are sunken into the garden. So you can water right in this pot. And the clay, it's unglazed, and it's the kind of clay that is permeable. So the water will seep through this pot. So it's kind of a timed release deep watering. And that's how the roots will find this deep source of water, and you don't have to water every day. One way that we have a really lush garden bed here as the heat of the summer approaches is that we get things started really early. So early in the spring is really important to get the plants in, and a lot of things are frost tolerant. So we will have frost all the way up until mid-May. So I can put plugs of starts that I've already started in here, and I can also plant from seed starting in March. And I have some kind of protection for them as they get established. We call this the hoop house. Technically, it's a high tunnel greenhouse, and it's our plant nursery for the most part. It's the way that it's different than a lot of other hoop houses or high tunnel greenhouses is that we put rain catchment on it. And this is a standalone system, so it's an independent rain catchment system, meaning we're not drawing on our main tank water from our other systems to water the plants in here, but we just collect the rain that comes off of this structure and use it for the plants, and we budget the water so that that's all that we need. So the gutters are put on in a special way. as we constructed this, we created these rails on the inside of the plastic, and that's what the gutters are connected to through the plastic. So it drains water into these tanks on either side, and so there's a simple filtration system, just making sure the water gets from here to here. And then we have a little bit of shading, as you'll see, on the side of these tanks to prevent them from breaking down quickly. These tanks are salvage tanks, so we make sure to paint them and protect them as much as possible. We also use them for a hardening off area, so we'll put the plants out here when we're getting them used to the wind and the sun before selling. Because we have a nursery business, and it's just a seasonal thing. So just for starting veggies and herbs in the spring to sell. Hi! So this is our plant nursery. This is where I grow all the babies here to sell for spring. So I grow veggie starts, herbs, companion plants, and some other specialty plants. Right now this is the end of the season, so these are my very last ones to sell. I'm planning to go to the farmer's market in a couple days. So this is a nice microclimate environment. You can hear the wind going right now, but it's not really windy in here because of the wind protection above. There's also plenty of ventilation below, and we have a 50% shade cloth above. So it's a nice nursery environment. It has a microclimate, so it stays warmer here in the winter, and you can get things going in here that you wouldn't be able to outside. So mostly I'll grow seedlings that I transfer from flats into these 2-inch pots and grow them in here, and then they're ready to sell in this condition. I really focus on growing as much native as possible and native adapted. So there are some plants that were introduced by the Spanish, for example, the Itoi onion to the Tohono O'odham tribe in southern Arizona. They're just onions that do really well in hot, dry climates and without much water. So I'll focus on things like that. I focus on perennial plants because, like we know in permaculture practice, perennial plants don't take as much effort to maintain, and year after year they're there to harvest from. So whatever we can grow that is perennial and edible is good. So I have, like, for example, these dragon's tongue arugula, and it's a wild arugula. They have a hard time getting started in pots in cultivated situations, but as soon as I put them in my garden outside, then they start flourishing, and they will send up seeds, and then the seeds will make babies themselves. And so as much as you can have a wild food producing garden that needs less of your attention, the better. I like to encourage people to plant perennial herbs as much as possible, like this lovage and like the sorrel. They can both be used in either fresh in salads or in stews. Perennials are basically, you get them established, and then they don't need to be reestablished year after year like annuals do. So once you've put in that work of getting them established, they'll need water here and there, but they have deep roots, and year after year they will come up and give you food. So in permaculture systems, it's important to think about your attention as a resource, and you only have so much. So whatever you can do to have things growing and not have to take care of them, the more things you can have growing. So the water system for this hoop house is really fairly simple. As you saw outside, we catch the water off of the roof of the hoop house. It goes into those tanks from the gutters, and then we'll pump the water inside to fill up all of our water storage in here. So these, we have about 600 gallons of storage here inside the hoop house, and so I can pump from out there into these tanks, into all of these tanks. I can also, when those tanks run out and there's nothing more to pump in here, then I'll redistribute the water inside of here and use it for watering plants. So I have a pump, I have a submersible pump that right now is in this tank. This one's completely full. That one I've used up already. So I pump from this tank into this barrel and also into that tank that is gravity fed. And then I just dip my watering can into here and then water my plants by hand. And that is the water system. But there's also another function that all of these tanks serve and all of the water, which is a climate mediation system. So when water is in especially black containers and it receives sun, it will absorb heat. So that's something that we want in the winter and in the spring and the off season in here. We want to absorb heat, and then at night when it gets cooler, it'll radiate the heat back out to warm our plants so that they will grow faster, like early in the early spring when we are growing plants to sell for garden starts. Now there's a little bit of a difference between the two kinds of tanks that we have in here. There's these that they do act as thermal mass and they do hold heat, but we are using the water to water with, so that thermal mass is reducing, it's going down in capacity. But we have these 55-gallon drums that the water doesn't rotate through them. So throughout the summer, throughout the day and throughout the summer, they're absorbing the heat of the sun and radiating the heat back out in the colder times. And we can count on these to do that because we're not ever taking the water out. Here we are in our outdoor community kitchen, and I'm going to show you the Greywater system, but it's not just the Greywater system, it's the water delivery system, and it's also the garden planting system. So, you know, these are living systems for Rainwater Reliance. So this is not just about the infrastructure, and it's not just about the gardens, it's about the relationships between everything. So this particular kitchen may at first look primitive to you. We have a hose end, and that's how we do the dishes. You have to hold it down to let the water come out. That way you can't just turn on the water and have it pouring out and just, you know, do the dishes like most people do. Also, we have buckets underneath the sink, and that also may seem primitive to have to carry a bucket and take it and water the tree or something. But actually, when you're living off rainwater, then your attention is an important part of the system. So that means this is a training project for whoever comes here and wants to learn how to live off rainwater. You have to train yourself to be very water conscious. So one thing is having the hose end where you have to spray it and you're actively making the water come out. And then also, you know, as the Greywater collects underneath, you're going to have to pull that bucket out and water something with it. So you don't want to wait until it gets really full that you know, spill it on your shoes or something when you do that. Or also, you have to be careful of how much you can actually lift. So this is how our consciousness is trained to live in this way. It's, you know, automated systems are great and hands-off and high-tech and all of that, but that's not about living in really close relationship with your resources, because that takes intelligence, that takes really knowing what the context is at any given moment, which takes humans, you know, and our brains and our decision-making power being part of the system. So that's why it's more complex than you might think at first glance, seeing the elements of our infrastructure. Okay, so doing the dishes might seem pretty self-explanatory, but you'd be surprised at how many times I get the question of, how do you do the dishes here? So I'm going to demonstrate. I also have this nice diagram that shows people the different steps of having a very water-conserving kitchen. Number one is, of course, if you have any gunk in there to compost, then we put it in the compost bucket, of course, because that's how we make good soil to grow plants without needing much water. So there's that. And then the next phase is if you have really dirty water, then put it down the drain, because you're not going to reuse that water. And then the next water is it's going to be not so dirty. And we take our diluted soap, which is, the soap does not have any salts in it, and we're very careful about our Greywater soaps. And then you can do your dish, and then this is going to be the really clean water over here. We'll make sure we save that, and it's done. And then you can use, yeah, this is a little bit dirty, but it's okay for the first wash of the next thing. And that's pretty dirty, that goes in there. And then, you know, we'll get there with these things. So, the idea is that you have collected dirtier water in one side and cleaner water in the other, and then you can use it again. So this dirtier water, if you had a pot that you were going to soak for a while because it had a bunch of cruddy stuff on there, then you just pour that in the pot. This one can get used for wash water for your next batch. This is our precious Big Berkey water filter. We love them because they're portable, they're Red Cross certified, and they provide us with all of the drinking water that we need. You just have to make sure to keep them filled so you don't run out of water. And this is how we do it. Take that off, fill this up. Every time you take water from below, you just refill, and there will always be water. We also like to have a separate jug as backup, always full. And so what's in the top of these is ceramic filters. And so back when the Big Berkey company used to tell us what was in their filters, it was colloidal silver, diatomaceous earth, and activated charcoal. At this point, they don't make these particular filters anymore. They make the black Berkey filters, which are great and work great. They just don't tell you what's in them. So the water filters through these ceramic filters and goes into this, and then we take it out from here. And you know, this filter actually has lasted us, I think, 14 years, because we got this when we first moved here. And sometimes they get clogged with algae or whatever, and so you can take them out, unscrew them, and you can scrub them down, scrub all the outer stuff off, and then install them again, and they will flow faster. So a guild in permaculture is an association of plants that work well together, and therefore use less water than they would individually, and ideally help each other through different ways, through, you know, connecting underground or giving room for things underground, like the nitrogen that this locust tree will take out of the air and put into the soil, and all of the other plants here benefit from that. So it's a microclimate, and it's a plant association that works well together. So this Greywater system is here on the edge of this guild area, and the trees, all the perennials, you know, they'll find where the water is. If it's somewhat nearby, those roots will come and suck out the water. So the trees and the perennials are actually the pumps of this particular Greywater system, and producing shade, producing moist environment in the air, and producing the flowers, the fruits, the herbs that we can eat. Also in this area we have, you know, this is the southwest side, and we put some ground cherries right in here, which is a native for our area. They're related to tomatillos, and they have like a husk around them. And so, and sometimes we do the ground cherries, sometimes we'll do garlic here, plant it over the winter. And so there's a little area for annuals as well as getting mostly perennials established. This Greywater system with the mulch basin here and the water source right next to our trees and our planting area is really beneficial for this whole place. Now, it may look like it's a little bit far away, but the trees are intelligent. All of these plants are intelligent, and they're through capillary action under the soil, the water moves through the soil and contacts the rootlets of the plants, and then the trees will start growing their roots in that direction, and they will find where the water source is. So even if it's a little bit away, especially in the desert, they're not going to be missing out on this precious resource. Here's our lovely outdoor shower, and here's how we do it. The hot's on this side. It's all solar heated hot water. We have different kinds of solar heating, but we'll save that for another class. You can spray yourself down with the hot water unless it's gotten too hot, or you can spray yourself down with a cold water. And if you need to mix them, we use this handy container, which happens to be a perfect pouring device. So you wash yourself down, you rinse, use some soap, and then rinse again, and by the end of all that, you haven't used more than 1 or 2 gallons. So that's how we do a very water conserving shower. You can totally get clean. So this is the feed for our outdoor shower, for the hot water heater and the cold. It's an old electric water heater, which we're just using for the tank. We have this tank gauge, which you can see from inside the shower. You can peek out and see where the water is right in this vinyl tube, and it shows the water's right here, and so that's how much water you have for a shower. Now when you're spraying yourself down, you don't necessarily know how much water you're using, but you can peek out of the shower and see, so the water is right against this hash mark, and then when it goes down to this hash mark, you've used 1 gallon, and that's how you can keep track. We also have a clothes washing area out here. You can actually put the hot water in here and it'll come right out into this basin, and you can use this little plunger which pushes air through your clothes. So we have the washing station here. This drains into the shower pan. Also, the overflow from our main tank goes into this shower pan, and then all of this water that we use, which we're very careful about soaps, of course, so nothing with chlorine, nothing with boron or boric acid, nothing with sodium. And you have to really watch out for that sodium, because most soaps have sodium. So you want to start with liquid soaps, because anything that solidifies soaps is generally sodium based. So we're looking at liquid soaps for washing and for doing your laundry, for doing anything around here in this place where we use just Greywater for all of our food. So you're careful about the soaps. Dr. Bronner's, of course, is a great place to start. And then it all goes down the drain. And where does the drain go? Into our lovely asparagus bed. This is our asparagus bed, but you'll notice it's mostly you're not seeing asparagus. But the wonderful thing is that when you plant asparagus, in which we planted probably 6 or 7 years ago, and it gets established, you water it over the winter, then it just keeps, every spring it'll pop up more asparagus for you, and you don't really have to do anything. That's the beauty of perennial vegetables, is that they don't take all that extra work that like tomatoes do. You have to start the tomatoes inside at a certain time early on and then plant them out, because we have short seasons here. And so some things, the tomatoes are from the tropics, so a lot of the vegetables that we're used to eating are not exactly from this desert environment. So the asparagus starts coming up in April, and look at this beauty here. So we'll be picking this soon and eating it. And then when these start coming up, but they're thinner, like the ones that we've started letting go over here, we will not pick them anymore and eat them. We'll let them grow and do their whole ferny thing, and they get tall and like big ferns. And then that's how they get the sunlight, and they put energy back in their roots for next year. And that's how it goes with the asparagus. But what's great is that you let them go, and then they create some shade so that you can plant some other things. So you can interplant amongst your perennial vegetables. So the Greywater comes from the shower into this bed. It goes through this black tube, which has holes in the bottom, and so it'll come out not all in one place. When this was untied and down, the water would all come out the end, which sometimes we might want, and we could always untie this and let it go down. But for now, it's up so that it has a kind of a closed end, and the water goes out a few places at the bottom of the pipe. So with the Greywater, you know, a mulch basin is great, but you know what can act like a mulch basin is just a bed full of really good soil that just absorbs all that Greywater immediately, because you don't want Greywater standing on the top of your soil. That's gross, you know. As long as it goes straight into the soil and it's not surfacing, you don't see it, you're good. Here we are currently inside of our largest structure on site, and so the roof that we saw outside, that's our main collection, is this roof above us. We are in a passive solar earth bermed structure. So you notice that when we were outside, we could see the gutters without having to climb a ladder. That's great because you can clean out the gutters by just walking by. But also, being earth bermed, being underground, means that it's moderated temperature from the earth. So the earth is always between 50 and 60 degrees. And if we only have to heat from 50 degrees up to 70 degrees, that's not as much as you would have to heat from outside temperature. So in the winter, it could be 20 degrees outside. So it really helps to have a passive solar structure because you don't have to bring in as much heat when you're earth bermed. And it happens the same way in the summer when you need cooling. So we're tapped into that cool earth temperature, and so this stays nice and cool. And the cool thing about this house is that it's always comfortable year-round. It's got these clear story windows, so the way that it harvests the sun is right through the windows and through the greenhouse. So that's how the heat is collected in the winter. So it's passive solar, it's got insulation, it's got thermal mass, but we'll save that for another class. We're going to focus on the water systems right now. So my husband and I lived down with the outdoor kitchen, down in the smaller straw bale cottage for 4.5 years with that system before we moved up to this house. So we had 4.5 years of training of using the bucket system and being very frugal with having the hose end and having to use that to have any water come out. And over that period of time, we trained ourselves to be water conscious. So we've graduated, and now we get a faucet that turns on like this. And this water comes from the roof that you saw, comes from the sky, goes to the roof, goes to that big tank, and then comes into our pantry, which is where the pressure tank and the pump is, and it pressurizes this. And then it comes out and we use this water to do our dishes. Very frugally, of course. And while we're waiting for the hot water to come, we can put it into our water filter. And so we're using every little drop of water. And so when the hot water comes, then we take it out and we do the dishes, but it's just a simple, it's part of our system basically. And so we can do the dishes in a frugal way and trust ourselves to turn on and off the water. But also the infrastructure does matter. We'll use more water this way if we're not really aware. This is the shower for those of us who have graduated into water consciousness. We have the hot and cold over here, and comes from the solar water heater that's right on the other side, because this is the south side of the house. And we designed the system so that the water from the water heater doesn't have to go very far, so you're not waiting for the hot to come for very long. So the kitchen sink is right on the other side of this wall. So here we mix the hot and the cold with these valves, and then we have a place where we can turn off. There's a valve at the top of this shower, so we can let the water run, we can turn off, soap down, water again. And then, you know, we installed this bathtub. I never imagined that I would be able to take a bath living off rainwater catchment, but turns out sometimes I can. There have been winters where the water is just overflowing and our tanks are full. So we just installed this in the fall. However, it's been very dry, so I haven't had a bath yet. But living sustainably off rainwater doesn't always mean being frugal. It means living in relationship with what you have. So why not take a nice long hot bath when there's plenty of water? That's part of the joy of living in connection with your environment. This tank that's insulated with this foil bubble stuff is part of our thermosiphoning hot water heater. So the panel is outside, it's below the tank, and water loops through the panel outside up to this tank and then comes in right here. I can feel the heat coming in through this tube, and then it has to displace some water. So the cold from the bottom goes out this tube and goes to the bottom of the panel. So that's a thermosiphoning hot water heater. And that's part of our system for our house. It's very efficient. It doesn't take any pumps. So from here, that feeds the sink and the shower, and then it comes out here and goes down into our Greywater system that goes to the greenhouse. So this is our attached greenhouse that's connected to our main house. And this is where we have all of the Greywater from the house come into our growing bed, and it grows food for us. Now this greenhouse has many functions. Of course, it processes our Greywater, it grows food, and it creates heat in the winter, and we open it to the house, and that's part of our heating system. But in the summer, like right now, we have it closed off to the house, and we have the Greywater coming into this bed. Now, we have perennials mostly, or annuals that act like perennials when they're in a greenhouse, in our Greywater bed. So we have the sorrel, that's a wonderful perennial green that tastes like lemons, and I like to put it in salads and stews and pretty much anything. So we have quite a bit of that here. We have a lime tree, which we just got a bunch of limes off of. We have kale and chard intermittently in here that lasts 3 or 4 years before we cut it down. And this kale is pretty old. Sometimes we have kale trees that grow up and mosh against the ceiling, and then and we just eat off of them. Right now it's the tree collards, the perennial tree collards that are really doing the vertical growth. And you know, as part of the maintenance of the greenhouse, we need to thin them and eat basically some of the leaves of the collards. So it's all interdependent here. And then we have parsley that I like to tuck in the understory of this bed. And because the parsley is really good, I mean, it's a superfood, it really provides a lot of nutrition, but also it can grow in the shade. And then when you want to cut something back because it's old, then it'll just pump up for you and grow in the sun. So it's a nice understory. And then there's different plants that just kind of come up on their own. This bed has been here for 8 years now, or 9 years. So it kind of has a life of its own. Speaking of a life of its own, this Greywater system is also a nice collaboration with nature. I designed it and installed it as a pumice wick, and so the water from our house comes in through this filter and then gets distributed somewhat evenly through a pumice wick that has been installed in the middle of this bed. So a pumice wick is basically, it's like a big wrapped sausage full of pumice, full of gravel-sized pumice. So there's all these little holes in the rock, and then the water comes out from this 1-inch pipe that has holes drilled in it into the pumice, and then the plants, again, are really the pumps, and they grow their roots down to harvest the water from where it's coming out of the pumice wick, and they suck it out. Now, a really cool thing about this system is that I had worms move in on their own. We have the red wiggler worms that we worm compost with, and so they just end up getting everywhere. And they moved in, and so if there's any debris, you know, they further break down things in the Greywater and they create worm castings. So now every time we have water coming into this wick, it's going through those worm castings and dosing our garden bed here with nutritious water from the worm castings. Here is where the water comes out into a primary filter for our Greywater system. See, it's pantyhose. We just get some knee highs and we filter it through this, and then it goes into this pipe, which goes out through the bed. Now, something to know for your region is your own Greywater code. So technically, kitchen sink drainage water is designated as black water, not gray water, and needs to be processed separately. So you'll have to look at what you can do according to your own codes on gray water. But the water comes out and you just have to use the right soaps, as we have mentioned. It goes out into the reservoir. You have to make sure you design the reservoir to absorb the amount of water that you're planning on releasing. So for us, we would never empty a whole entire bathtub into this pumice wick because it's only designed for about 20 gallons at a time, which is, pretty rare. We would actually have 20 gallons come out. But if we were going to take a bath and drain that, that's why we installed this. So I can open up that filter, I can cap the end for a short time, and then open up this valve, and then this will go out to our expanded sunchoke bed, which is where we've designated that the bathtub drainage will go. This is where the pipe comes out, and all of these worms have just inhabited this area. Every now and then I have to scoop out the worm castings to give room, but the pumice is underneath here. It's a nice collaboration with nature in this design. This greenhouse is where I start all of my flats full of seeds for my seedling production in the spring. And this is a warmer greenhouse than the hoop house because it's attached to my living space, and it has these barrels of water which act as thermal mass, as well as just being connected to the thermal mass of my home. So it stays nice and warm in here to get the seeds all sprouting early when it's still really cold outside. Well, thanks for coming today. I hope you've enjoyed your tour of Ampersand Sustainable Learning Center. We live off of rain catchment as our only source of water, and I've showed you the different elements that allow us to do that while having guests and students and growing a significant amount of our produce. There are some common themes in our design of how we do this. So I'm going to review a few themes so you may remember that these are common elements for designing really water conscious systems. One of them is creating microclimates. And so for us here, that means water harvesting earthworks, that means gray water systems, soil, so having really good soil, and that means soil production on site with your compost and manures. And then also having protection from the elements. So sometimes shade protection, sometimes wind protection. So creating microclimates is very important for growing food here in the hot desert. So intentional design it's really important to have intentional design at the point of water use. So I'm talking about where the water comes out for irrigation systems. I'm talking about for your sink, for your shower. You need to be able to see how much water you're using and use it consciously. So feedback mechanisms are really important to integrate into those points of use so you know how much you're using. And tracking water is really important. Integrating your intelligence within the design is a really important part of how we do things here, how we live consciously with our environment, because the conditions are always changing. Sometimes it's hot and dry. Sometimes there's a lot of water, and like during monsoon season. So if you have a lot of water, if your asparagus bed needs water, you might as well take a long shower. There are certain relationships that you need to be conscious of. And it doesn't take expensive equipment to make these systems. It just takes using your brain and designing systems so that you're making the decisions as you're using the water. So those are some very important elements. The last one I want to mention is water budgeting. So in order to live off rain catchment, you need to budget your water. You have only so much water, and you can kind of project when you're going to get the next rain, but you have to project. You have to imagine how much water you're going to use for different things and not get a project or a garden space started if you don't know that you're going to have the water to see it through harvest. So water budgeting, feedback systems, projecting into the future, planning, all of that is very important for living off of rain catchment. And yeah, I hope you've taken something out of our systems here to help adapt your location. Every place is different, and every design is going to be, if it's a good design, it's going to be adapted to your location. So I hope this helps you with your water system designs, and we'll see you for the next class.